Story number 1. I'm a 27-year-old woman, and this happened to me 9 or 10 years ago, when I was a senior in high school. We lived in a large house, but my siblings were always away at college or boarding school, so it was only my parents and I in the house. I'm a light sleeper, and when I woke in the dark and saw my alarm clock flashing 3:11 a.m., I wasn't too surprised. However, I was wide awake. I lay there wondering what had woken me, when I heard very soft footsteps on the stairs outside my bedroom. The door to my room was parallel to the left side of the bed, and I happened to be laying my back to the door when the footsteps approached. I thought it must have been one of my parents checking on me for some reason. Then the doorknob was turned so slowly. Still, they were trying not to wake me. The door began to open again slowly and carefully. However, it made a creaking noise no matter how slowly it was opened, so the person finally just shoved it the rest of the way to silence the creak. Still, my naive brain thought it was one of my parents, until a flashlight was clicked on. I froze. Terror flooded me, and I remember that I instantly broke out in a sweat. They were behind me, and I was facing away, so they couldn't tell that I was wide awake. I always used to think that if something like that ever happened, I'd be such a badass. I'd whip out of bed and punch them, attack them, scream, shout, just do something. But I couldn't do anything. All I could do was try to keep my breathing deep and even, despite the pounding of my heart, so the intruder wouldn't know I was awake. After about 10 seconds, they finally moved the light away and shone it around the rest of my bedroom. I prayed and begged and bartered with anything that would listen to me as the intruder walked around my room, looking at my things. I could vaguely see their shape, large and bulky, almost as if they were wearing 2 coats, and they had a baseball cap on. They didn't shine the flashlight on me again, and after a few minutes, which felt like an eternity, they left my room. I could still hear them walking around the rest of the house, through my siblings' empty bedrooms. I was still sweating, still frozen in terror, not knowing what to do. I wanted to grab my phone and call my dad, who was asleep downstairs. I wanted to call our landline so the phones would ring and wake everyone up. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to get up and run for my room. I wanted to cry. I couldn't do anything of that. I was afraid they would hear me. I didn't know if they had a weapon or would try to hurt me or my parents. I wouldn't wish such helpless terror on my worst enemy. I don't know how, but I must have passed out from fear, or the adrenaline worn off when I fell asleep, because the next thing I knew it was 6 a.m. and I could hear my parents downstairs. I ran downstairs as calmly as I could and asked them had they been into my bedroom last night. Their faces went blank as they said no. That was the last straw. I broke down in sobs and told them everything. I said that someone was in my room last night, and even as I typed this my hands began shaking and I teared up. The police were called, even though there was little they could do at that point. Apparently when my parents woke up, all the doors to the outside were standing wide open, and there was a duffel bag at the bottom of the stairs. All that was inside was a coil of nylon rope, an empty USB flash drive, and a pair of my underwear. I don't want to think about what that was for or what he planned to do. But the intruder hadn't taken anything of value, and we have no idea why they left in what appeared to be a hurry. It took me about a week to be able to sleep in my own room, a sanctuary which felt violated and frightening to me now. I carry pepper spray and sleep with a machete next to my bed, and double check my locks every night. Hopefully this will never happen again, but if it does, hopefully I won't freeze, and hopefully I'll be ready. Story number 2. I spoke to the ghost of my great-grandmother on the telephone. I didn't recognise her voice because she had died over 60 years before I was born. but a very elderly sounding lady called and calmly told me to tell Essie that it's time to come home now. I kept telling her she had the wrong number, but she was adamant that I pass along the message. 2 hours later, my grandmother's assisted living home called and told us that my grandmother, Esther, had passed away in her sleep. Her mother had died when she was 16, and Essie was my grandmother's childhood nickname. This was 25 years ago, and thinking about it now still makes my hair stand on end. Story number 3. When I was in high school, I had a lot of these experiences. At the house my dad lived in at the time, there were plenty of times I'd be sitting in the living room and distinctly hear the cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen. It was just me and my dad that lived in the house, and you could clearly see when his bedroom door was shut, as he'd always be asleep. Normally my dad worked from 7 till 3, but occasionally would work an overnight shift. One night he was working until 11. I was 17 at the time, and around 8 o'clock or so, I'm sitting in my room playing Borderlands, and I think I hear footsteps coming from the living room, which was adjacent to my bedroom, and assume my dad's home early, so I head back to Borderlands. I keep hearing the steps, so I pause the game and listen, and the footsteps are just slowly pacing back and forth between the living room and the kitchen, in a steady rhythm. I laid in bed scared shitless, and actually counted the steps. Every time it took 15 paces to the living room, 15 back to the kitchen. Needless to say, I'd not fucking sleep that night. I had another situation at my mum's house about 2 years prior to this. Out of nowhere my alarm clock would go off at midnight every night, so I assumed it was busted and got rid of it. Fast forwarding 2 years, my mum gets another brand new alarm clock for my room. Suddenly, the alarm goes off at midnight. I thought nothing of it. I turned it off to avoid this happening again. However, it happened again the next night, and then my sisters pointed out that the old one I had that did it. So I checked and made sure no alarms were set. Double checked at 11:56. Sure enough, 4 minutes later, my alarm goes off. Freaked out, I threw it out. The next night was my dad's night to have me. I had a buddy of mine over, and my dad was working the night shift. He left for work around 2 AM, and my friend had brought over an iPod dock to listen to. He didn't have the clock set or anything. My friend knew nothing of the last couple of nights, so I knew he was just fucking with me. So about 2 minutes after Dad leaves, we hear an alarm clock coming from my room. I went in. You know how if you just plug in a clock without setting it, the numbers just blink on and off? Well, it was doing that as soon as I picked it up. The clock set itself to 12 AM and then just turned off by itself.